In this video I'm going to demonstrate how we can create these 4 rubber stamps which are fully customizable using ArtCAM Express. And I'm going to be using the base version of ArtCAM Express with no modules added. So I'm going to start off by creating this first stamp here. I'm going to do this, I'm going to say File, close the model, and I'm going to open up an image file. So I'm going to say Open. I can open this kitty.png. Okay, so we get this dialog up here like so. We want to make sure the height in Z is 0, and we can say OK. Now if we look down the bottom, we can have a look at our colour palette, which has got all of these different shades of black to grey to white, which is making up our 2D image of our kitten. So this is no use to us, as we want to create vectors from the image. So what I'm first of all going to do is reduce the colours using this icon at the top here. If I select that, I can simply pull on this slider here and it's going to reduce the number of colours in our image. So now I've dropped it down to 2. I can say OK. We can see that we've got these colours down here at the bottom. And at the moment we've got white set to our primary colour because it's at the front, and we've got this dark grey black colour at the bottom, which is our secondary colour. So I'm just going to switch those around like so. So black is now our primary colour, and now I want to create vectors from this colour. So I'm going to use the bitmap to vector tool. I want to create a boundary. I don't want to use a centre line. I'm going to set my speckle size to be 20, and that's going to eliminate all of these odd pixels here. We just want to ignore those and not create vectors around these. So anything less than 20 pixels will be ignored. I'm going to set my smoothness to 100, so we've got nice smooth vectors going around my kitty cat, and my colour is set to primary. So now I'm going to create my vectors. Okay, so my vector's been created in magenta, so that might not be that easy to see. I can use this slider here to just change the transparency of my image. I can do this, or using this icon here, I can turn my image off or on. So I'm just going to leave it off. I'll center my model in my view, and we can see we've got this extra vector here. So there must have been more than 20 pixels to make up that whisker vector. So I can simply select it and delete it. Now I'm happy with my kitten vectors. I'm simply going to box select them and export them. So I'm going to say vectors, export, and I'm just going to call these kitten, and that's going to save them as an EPS file. So I'm going to hit save, and now I can close this down. So I'm going to say File, Close Model. I don't need to save my changes because I've already exported and saved my vectors elsewhere. So I'm going to say No. So now I'm going to create a new model. These are going to create the basis for my stamps. So I want a width of 100, a height of 100, a thickness of 10. I want my units in millimetres. We can have the origin set to the bottom left, but we can interactively change this by clicking on this image here. I'm going to set that bottom left, and we want material Z0, top of block, and model position in material, top of block. And I'm going to say OK. Okay, so now I need to start creating the outlines of my stamps. Do this by creating a square. So I'm going to select to create a square over here. I want a width and height of 50. I'm going to give it a quarter radius of 5. And you can see it's been created with the origin over the origin of my model. So I just need to change this. I can put my center point, X is 25, Y is 25, and there it pops up in the correct position. And I'm going to say OK. So now what I'm going to do is, with this selected, I'm going to mirror it across my model, and then I'm going to mirror it over the top, so we've got 4. So using the mirror objects icon, I can say mirror horizontally across the model. I want to make sure that I've got copy the original object selected, because we want 4 of these and not just one moving around the model. Select both of these, and then we're going to vertically mirror them over the top, like so. So once you've done that, we can close it down, and I can actually import my kitten vectors now. So I'm going to say vectors, import, kitten EPS. Open. And you can see my kitten is automatically placed at the bottom here. We want to position him in this top left hand stamp. So with my kitten vector selected, I'm going to shift select my top left hand stamp vector, and I'm going to hold down over here and say center vector, and it gets centered in the middle of that second vector that we selected. So I'm going to deselect them both now and resize my kitten vector. So with just the kitten vector selected, we can press T on the keyboard, or we can use the transform icon here. So T is the shortcut. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and this is going to resize him from the center. So it's going to keep him central inside our stamp profile vector. So once I've done that, I can select all of the vectors that make up my first stamp. I'm going to head over to the 3D view, and I'm going to create a toolpath. So I'm going to click on toolpath over here, and I'm going to do a 2D area clearance toolpath. So we've already got our vector selected. We're going to do a start depth of 0 because our model is at the top of the block. Finish depth of 3mm. So we're going to machine 3mm into our rubber, and I'm going to add a 0.5mm end mill. So I've got the default parameters here like so. I'm going to choose an offset strategy, and I'm going to name my toolpath kitten underscore area clear, just so we know what it is. I'm going to say calculate now, and you can see that our toolpaths have been calculated. So I can close my dialog down. We can investigate our toolpath if we like. Looks okay, and now I can expand it, and we can see we've got our kitten area clear in our toolpath list. So I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to simulate that toolpath like so. Okay, so it's immediately apparent that we've got a depth color there, and I'm just going to turn that off first of all. If we go to simulation, I'm going to deselect depth color and say apply. Okay, so we've just got the simulation default. If I zoom in here, we can see we've got this quite a jagged edge here. We've also got some very thin areas of what's going to be embossed rubber, and that's going to be quite flimsy. First of all, we're going to adjust the resolution. Okay, so I can eliminate all these jagged areas like so. If I delete my simulation, so on the right hand side, we're going to right click on simulation and say delete, and then I can adjust my resolution. So in our model menu at the top, we can hold down over there and select adjust model resolution. So the current resolution is 1000 by 1000. I'm going to pull this slider up so it's over 3300, and I'll just say OK to that. Doesn't really matter exactly where you put it, just increase it a little bit because we've got quite a small model. And then again, all I'm going to do is simulate my toolpath. Okay, so we can immediately see that we've improved the quality of our simulation. We've eliminated all those big jaggedy edges. What we can see though is we've got this thin edge here. It might be easier if we turn the depth shading back on. So if I go to simulation, go to depth color, and I'm going to choose my simulation, my material color to be blue wax to represent a blue ink color. I'm going to have my depth color set to red, so I can just select it from my color palette at the bottom, and I'm going to say apply. So if I just zoom out, you can see we've got kind of the red color to represent the rubber stamp, and then the blue color to represent an ink. If I zoom into this area here, See, we've got a reasonably thin looking wall which could be easily damaged, or it could get damaged whilst we're machining the rubber stamp. So I'm just going to measure how thick that is. So we've got the measure tool on the left hand side, and I can just click on one side, click on the other side, and then we're told over here we've got a distance of 0.555 millimeters. So it's just over half a mil thick. And we know it's 3 millimeters high or deep, so what we can do is actually thicken that and make a more robust stamp, and it can make a stamp with more impact. Okay, so I'm just going to close that down, and I'm going to delete that simulation. I'm going to head back to my 2D view. You can see that we've got a 2D representation of our toolpath. That's always nice to inspect to see how it's machining our part. But we can just turn that off by turning off the light bulb at the top here. Okay, so if I have a look at my vectors of my cat, you can see we've got some problematic areas here which can just be touched up by using node editing. So first of all, I'm going to select my vectors. You can see that they're all selected together even though they're not all joined, and that's because they're grouped. They're also shown in purple because they're grouped, and I'm going to right click on these and I'm going to say ungroup vectors. So I'm going to deselect them and just select the one that has the problem area, and I'm going to press N on the keyboard to enter node editing mode. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm simply going to hover over this node here and going to press D on my keyboard to delete it. I'll do exactly the same to this one here, hover over it, press D on my keyboard to delete it, and then I can pull these handles and adjust this shape like so. So I just want to create a nice smooth shape here. I can do exactly the same to the other side. Pull my handles around. I might want to delete a point and pull my handles out like so to create a nice smooth curve. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I can move on to this area here. So that's going to create a thin point of rubber, and that could easily break off either when we're machining it or maybe after we've used it a couple of times or if we've dropped it. So we just want to thicken that up to make our stamp a little bit more robust. Now all I'm going to do is select it. We're already in node editing mode. I can just pull these nodes apart to just give us a bit more of a thickness there. This one looks okay, but I'm just going to pan over by holding the shift key and my middle mouse button, and I'm going to thicken up these ones slightly as well. So I just select this one here and open up these nodes, and then this one here I can just pull the handles across like so. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I'm going to start thickening these areas here. I'm going to do that by using the offset function. So I'm going to change away from node editing mode. I'm going to select my vector. I'm going to say offset vectors. I'm going to choose an offset distance of 0.3 millimeters. I'm going to offset outwards right, and I want to have radiused corners. And I'm going to say delete original vectors, and I'm also going to disable interactive offsetting. And I'm going to say offset. You can see the spacing between these two vectors has been increased by 0.6 of a millimeter. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's actually going to thicken up our stamp by over half a mil. It's going to be enough. So I'm going to select all of these inner vectors like so. And these are also going to be offset outwards. So I'm going to offset these outwards by 0.25. Outwards right again, and radius, and I'm going to say offset. Okay, so now I can select all of my inner vectors. So the little paws, the nose, these outside eye ones, not these ones yet, and these ear vectors like so. We're going to leave these ones as they are. So I'm going to offset these ones 0.2 millimeters inwards offset. Okay, now we're going to select our pupil vectors and offset those inwards 0.15 millimeters. Okay, so we'll just thicken up our edges like so. I'm going to go back to my 3D view. I'll just zoom out there. I'm going to select all of the vectors that create this stamp, and I'm going to double click on Kitten Area Clear, so the toolpath I created previously. Okay, so when I click on this, because we've edited all of these vectors, we've only got one of the original ones left, which is the profile vector. So you just want to make sure you've got all of the vectors which create the first stamp selected. We don't need to change any of our parameters, we've already done it. All we want to do is say calculate now, and that's going to recalculate our toolpath and get rid of the first one that we did. And close that down, right click on my toolpath and say simulate. If we look in here now, you can see we've got much thicker walls of our cat. And if I measure this now, I use the measure tool, I'm going to click across from here to here. You can see we've now got a distance of 1.294 millimeters. So that's much thicker than it was previously, and that should be more robust. So I'm going to cancel that. We now want to create a vector which is going to cut out this stamp, so we want to create the profile vector. I'm just going to turn off the 2D view of our toolpath. I'm going to deselect all of our vectors and just select the outside vector. I'm going to click on toolpaths, and then I can create a 2D toolpath. So I'm going to create the 2D profile toolpath. I want to profile along selected vectors. I've got a start depth of 0, and it's already input the finish depth of 10 because I want to cut all the way through my material. I'm going to choose a profiling tool, and I'm going to choose a 1.5 millimeter end mill and say OK. Now all I need to do is input a name, and I'm going to call this profile and say calculate. Once I've done that, I can close that dialog down, right click on profile and say simulate toolpath. When I've done that, I'm happy with my first stamp, and I'm going to start creating my second stamp. So I'm going to go over to the 2D view. I'm going to create vector text. I'm just going to click anywhere in my second stamp, like so. And I can start typing. I'm going to use the name Anna for no particular reason whatsoever. I can just use this move tool, and I'll position it somewhere inside my second profile of my stamp. Okay, so I'm going to use the engraver font, and that's just because it's nice and chunky, so it will work well for my stamp. I'm just going to select all of my text, and I'm going to increase the size a little bit to maybe 36 points. And then if I zoom in here, I want to make sure that my 0.5 millimeter tool can fit in there. So I'm just going to maybe space those out a little bit. These ones look quite far apart, so I can bring them a little bit closer together. And the same with these two here. I'll bring them a bit closer together, otherwise it looks a bit disjointed. So when I'm happy with that, I can say done. And you can see that these vectors which make up my text are all grouped together, and they're shown in purple, and that's fine. So what I want to do is center this text horizontally within my second stamp profile vector. So I'm going to select my text first, then my stamp profile vector, and we're going to say center horizontally, which is this one here. You see that just nudged those slightly so they were more central. Now I can select just my text, and using the arrow keys on the keyboard I can manually position these like so. Now the final thing that I need to do is actually reverse these, so I need to mirror them, so when we actually use the stamp the name is printed correctly. So with my vector text selected, I'm going to say mirror objects, and I want to mirror horizontally over the centre, and I'm going to take off the copy the original object, so I want to turn that off. Move it over centre, and that's perfect. So now what I need to do is actually create my paw prints from an image again to go in my second stamp. So I'm going to save this model. I'm going to save it and just call it Express Demo. Save. And then I'm going to open up my kittypaw.png and open that up like so. Okay, so again we want to have Z height as 0, units in millimetres, say OK. We want to reduce the colours as we've got all of these greys and blacks which create our 2D image, even though you wouldn't think it. So I'm going to reduce the colours. I can actually just input the value there as a 2 and say OK. So we've got two colours here. I want to select black as my primary, so I'll just toggle that to the front. So that means we're creating the vectors around the black. And then I'm going to say bitmap to vector. I'm going to keep the same parameters as previously. I'm going to say create vectors. So now I can turn the shading down, or just turn my image off. I don't want to keep all of these paw prints, I actually just want 2. So I'm just going to box select the top 2 and then export just these. So I'm going to say vectors, export. I'm going to call them kitten paws. That's going to save it as an EPS, and I'm going to say save. Okay, so now I can just open up my Express demo and say open. We get this dialog. Do I want to save my changes? There's no need because I've already saved the vectors that I actually want to keep. So that's opened up our model, and now I can import them. So vectors, import, kitten paws, open. So it's positioned over there like so, and it looks like I need to resize them. So I'm going to go to my transform tool here, or I could press T on the keyboard. I'm just going to resize these like so. Now, as before, when we exported and imported vectors, they become grouped like so. So I'm going to ungroup them, so I can use the shortcut, which is actually Control U, and they go from purple to magenta. Now I want to group just my left paw, all of these together, so I can do the shortcut Control G, and now I've grouped these vectors together, so I can move them around like so. And I'm going to do the same with the larger paw, so Control G. So now I want to re-enter my transform tool, so I'm going to press T on the keyboard, and I'm just going to move my vectors around and position them how I want them to be. Select my second vector. I'll just position this one like so. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I'm going to start on my third stamp. And this is going to be a boy's name. So I'm going to create vector text, click anywhere in my third stamp, and I'm going to use the name David. Again, no particular reason whatsoever. Select all of this text, there's more letters in David, so I'm just going to change the size to 34 points. When we get that move tool, we can just move them so it's more centrally located within my third stamp profile vector. Okay, so again we've got this funny spacing. You can see we've got an overlap here of our letters, which is what we definitely don't want. And these are quite spaced out, so I'm just going to bring the D and the A closer together by using this spacing on the right hand side, which is my text tool dialog. I'm going to make my A and my V a little further apart, like so. I'm definitely going to bring my V and my I further apart because they're overlapping at the moment. And we want our tool to fit through between our letters. We don't want any material left there. And I think my D and my I looks okay. So once I'm happy with my text, I'm going to say done. So what I did before, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to center these horizontally. So with my text selected, shift select my stamp vector and say center horizontally. I'm going to deselect everything, just select my text, and then using my arrow keys on my keyboard, I'm just going to position my text in the top of my third stamp. Now what I want to do is mirror these so we get David printed correctly. So I'm going to mirror over the centre and do that horizontally, just like we did with the word Anna. Close that down. So now I want to put a dog paw print in my third stamp. So I can save my model. I'm going to open up dogpaw.png. I'm going to set my Z height to 0, say OK. Again, we've got all of these greys making up my 2D image. This time I'm going to do it slightly different. I'm going to go straight to bitmap to vector. And you can see we've got this reduce colours option inside this tool. So I'm going to open it up, drag it down to 2, say OK. Then I'm not going to change my primary colour this time. I'm just going to switch here. So we've got, we're going to create boundary around the secondary colour instead. So I'm going to say create vectors. You can see they've been created, and I'm simply going to export them as before. So vectors, export, and I'm going to call this dog paw. That's going to save us an EPS again. We'll save that. We're going to reopen our stamps that we've already created. No need to save our changes. And we can import our dogpaw.eps like so. Okay, so we want to center our dog paw within our third stamp profile vector. So we'll shift select the stamp vector and we're going to say center horizontally. Then I'm just going to manually position it using the arrow keys so it's centrally in the bottom third of our third stamp. I'm going to press T on my keyboard to open up the transform tool, and then holding down the Alt key I'm going to expand my dog paw from the centre like so. Okay, so now I'm happy with that. I'm going to move on to my fourth stamp. So this is actually going to be the image of a dog. So again, I'm going to save my model. I'm going to open up my dog.png. And again, Z height of 0. I'm going to reduce my colours to 2. Switch them over. Bitmap to vector. I'm actually going to change this slightly. So we've got quite a mean looking dog. I'm going to change the smoothness from 100% down to 75%. So we keep some of these sharp edges. And our dog has a bit more character to him. So I'm going to say create vectors. You can see we've kept some of these sharp corners like so. And I'm going to export them. I'm just going to call him dog.eps and we'll save that. We can open up our stamps and then just import him in. And then we're almost done. Okay, so I'll do vectors, import, dog, EPS. You can see it's down here in the left hand corner where they've all appeared. And I want to center him in the final profile vector. So I'll shift select my last profile vector and we're going to say center. We'll deselect him. Just select the dog vectors and then holding down the Alt key after you've entered the transform tool. We want to resize him like so. Okay, so we're going to have some problem areas like we had with our cat. So we've got some thin areas here. Just zoom into that. It's got our measure tool. I'll just measure between here and here. Again, we've got just over 0.5 millimetre, and that could be not desirable for our stamp. It could be quite flimsy. So what I'm going to do is ungroup my vectors, so Control U. I'm just going to deselect them, select the outermost vector, and I'm going to offset that outwards. So I'm going to use my offset tool, offset distance 0.25 millimeters outwards, and this time we're going to keep the sharp corners and say offset. I'm going to select all the inner vectors, so 1, 2, 3, 4, like so, and I'm going to offset these inwards off 1/4 millimeter. So offset those like so, and then I'm just going to offset these ones here outwards by 0.15 millimeters, and we'll have these radius. I'm going to say offset. Okay, so now we've done that, you can see that we actually still have some problem areas. We've created new problem areas. If I measure this here, I've got a distance of 0.26, so our tool's not going to be able to get through there, and it's going to leave some material. So what I'm going to do is select this vector, just using my arrow keys. I'm just going to move it up a bit and to the left, and I can remeasure that. Across there, now we've got a gap of bigger than 0.5 mil, so that's fine. Okay, so we're going to have a problem here as well. I'm just going to move this one inwards a little bit. I'm going to select all 3 of these vectors and move those over a little bit. It's not going to affect our dog too much, but if we look over in this area here, you can see we've got quite a small area here. Yeah, so that's actually just 1/4 millimeter. So what I can do, select this vector here, I'm going to enter node editing mode, like so, and I can just cut this area out and then reshape this vector. So I'm going to hover over this node here, okay, and then press C on the keyboard, and it looks like nothing has happened, but that's because we've only cut the vector in one place. So what I need to do is actually cut it in another place. So I'm going to hover over just any one of these here that seems suitable and press C on the keyboard. And now if I just leave node editing mode, so I'm going to press N on the keyboard, you can see that we've cut this area away from our existing vector. So what I'm going to do is just select this bit and delete it. I'm going to click on this vector here, go back into node editing by hitting N on the keyboard. So we've got some kind of useless nodes here that aren't actually adding any information to this line. So I'm just going to hover over them, press D on the keyboard over each of them to delete them. I'm not going to delete this one at the end here. What I'm actually going to do is move it down here, so I've got a nice big gap here, or big enough at least for my 1/2 mil tool to get through. I can move this one if I want to as well. Then I can simply close this vector up. I can do this without drawing a polyline manually. I can simply go up here and say close vector with a line, and that's all done for me. So I'm going to exit node editing mode by pressing N on my keyboard, and I'm happy now with all of my stamps. I'm going to go over to my 3D view. We've already created some toolpaths. If I just expand these, you can see we've got our first area clear for our first stamp, and we need to create area clear for our second, third and fourth stamps. And I can actually do this by opening up my kitten area clear. I've got all the parameters the same. What I'm going to do is select all the vectors for my second stamp, and I'm just going to rename it Anna area clear. Say calculate now, and you can see that actually we've not overwritten the kitten area clear, we've just created a new one using the same parameters without having to open up a new dialog every time. So I'm going to do this for the third stamp, call it David area clear, calculate now, and then finally the dog, and I'm going to call this dog area clear, calculate now. So I've got all of my area clears. I've got my profile, which is just for the first one. What I can do with this one is just open it up. I'll just turn off all of the views of my other vectors, as it can get quite complicated looking. I'm going to zoom into the center here, and I'm going to shift select all of the profile vectors. I'm going to say calculate now. You see that we've got profile path that's been created. I can close that down. Then what I'm just going to do is drag the profile vector so it cuts them out at the end after machining all of the area clear. Now I'm going to right click on toolpaths and say simulate all. So we've got our kitten area clear. Now we've got our Anna area clear, David area clear, and then finally our dog area clear, and then we'll have our profiling passes. Just cutting out our stamps. Yep, so that looks good to me. We just have these extra chunks of material here, and we can get rid of those. If we go to our simulation, we get our simulation menu here, and this one at the end is delete waste material. So I'll click on that, then I can auto delete waste material. So ArtCAM gets rid of as much as it knows is waste material, and there's actually a little chunk left in the middle. So as long as you've got delete picked material checked, we can just click on that and it's going to delete that for us. So once you're happy with your simulation, the next thing to do is export the G-code. So I'm going to close this down, click on my toolpaths, and I want to say save toolpaths. So first of all, I want to save all of my area clear toolpaths. So I'm going to select my profile and just put it over here in the calculated toolpath menu. So toolpaths to save. I'm going to save all 4 of my area clears because they're all using the same tool. They can just run straight after the other. I don't want to save them into different files. I just want them all to be exported together. So what I'm going to do is just name my file with the tool that I'm using. So I'm going to put 0.5mm end mill, and then I can just hit save. First of all, we can have a look at the machine file format. We've got all of these post-processors here which you can choose from. I'm just going to use the G-code arcs millimeter and save it as a TAP file just because that's a common one. And I'm exporting these like we don't have an automatic tool changer. We have to manually put in our tools. And I'm going to save that to the same folder I've been using all along. So I'm going to hit save, and I'm just going to navigate to that folder so we can have a look at it. So I know it's on my desktop. Just open it up, and we've got this 0.5mm endmill.tap file. So I'll open that with Notepad, and here you can see we've got the G-code that ArtCAM has output for us, and that's all 4 of our area clear toolpaths output in one file, one after the other. So I'll close that down. Now I can select all of my area clears and just pop them over there, and I just want to save my final cutout toolpath. So this time I'm going to call my file name 1.5mm end mill profile, and I can save that, and it's going to go into the same location. We can have a look at that if you want, and there we have the G-code, which is going to cut out all of our stamps. And that is the end of this tutorial. There will be more, so watch out for those. Thank you very much for watching.